The proximity alarm's shrill wail cut through the ambient hum of Omega-7's life support systems at precisely 0347 hours, dragging Dr. Kieran Thorne from his third cup of genuine Earth coffee and a fascinating research paper on xenobiological cellular regeneration. The mining station's command center erupted into controlled chaos as night shift operators scrambled to identify the source of the disturbance, their voices mixing with the electronic chatter of automated systems running diagnostic protocols. "Unknown vessel detected in Sector 77 Alpha," announced Lieutenant Chen from the sensor station, her fingers dancing across holographic displays that painted her face in shifting blue light. "Configuration doesn't match any known human or registered alien designs." Kieran set down his coffee mug with the careful precision of a man who'd learned that spilled beverages and sensitive laboratory equipment made poor companions. As the station's senior xenobiologist, he'd seen his share of unusual discoveries over the past 5 years stationed at this remote outpost, but something about the lieutenant's tone suggested this was different from the typical space debris or malfunctioning cargo pods they usually encountered. "How big are we talking?" Kieran asked, making his way to the central display where a three-dimensional representation of local space showed the mysterious object as a pulsing red dot approximately 2,000 kilometers from the station. "Roughly 40 meters in length, 15 meters at the widest point," Chen replied, enhancing the sensor data to reveal more details. "It's not broadcasting any identification signals, and the hull composition is, well, it's unlike anything in our material database." The object appeared on the main screen as little more than a gleaming speck against the star field, but Kieran's trained eye immediately noticed something peculiar about its movement patterns. Unlike the random tumbling of typical space debris, this vessel maintained a slow, almost purposeful rotation, as if its internal systems retained some functionality despite showing no active power signatures. "Any life signs?" he asked, though he already suspected the answer would be negative. The scanners on Omega-7 were designed primarily for geological surveys and mining operations, not the delicate biological readings required for xenological research. "Negative on conventional life signs, but there's something odd about the energy readings," Chen frowned at her displays. "We're detecting what looks like contained quantum fluctuations, almost like a stasis field or cryogenic system, but the power source appears to be completely inactive." Kieran felt the familiar thrill of scientific discovery tingling at the base of his skull. In 5 years of cataloging mineral samples and studying the occasional bacterial life form found in asteroid cores, he'd begun to wonder if his expertise in xenobiology would ever prove useful on this remote mining operation. The opportunity to examine an actual alien vessel with potentially sophisticated life support technology was exactly the kind of breakthrough that could revolutionize their understanding of extraterrestrial biology. "I'm suiting up for EVA," he announced, already mentally calculating the equipment he'd need for a proper xenological survey. "Dr. Thorne," came the voice of Station Commander Morrison from across the command center, "I don't think that's advisable. We don't know anything about this vessel's origin, defensive capabilities, or potential contamination risks. Commander, with all due respect, we're never going to know anything about it if we just sit here and observe from a distance," Kieran replied, his excitement evident despite his attempt at professional detachment. "This could be the discovery of a lifetime. We're talking about potentially the first intact alien vessel ever recovered by human science. Or the first alien booby trap designed to kill curious xenobiologists," Morrison countered with the dry humor that had made him popular among the mining crews. "Your enthusiasm is admirable, Doctor, but my job is to keep this station and everyone on it alive. Which is exactly why we need to investigate properly," Kieran pressed his case. "If this thing poses a threat, we need to understand what we're dealing with. If it's harmless, we're passing up an unprecedented opportunity for scientific advancement. Either way, sitting here debating isn't getting us any closer to answers." Morrison considered this for a moment, studying the tactical display that showed the vessel's position relative to their station. The object was close enough to be reached by shuttle but far enough away that any potential explosive device wouldn't directly threaten Omega-7's structure. "Fine," the commander said finally. "But you take a full security escort, maintain constant communication, and at the first sign of anything unusual, you abort the mission and return immediately. Define unusual, Kieran said with a grin. Because I have a feeling everything about this is going to be unusual. 2 hours later, Kieran found himself floating in the cargo bay of Shuttle Miranda, checking and rechecking his specialized xenobiological equipment while Security Chief Rodriguez ran through the final safety protocols. The shuttle's pilot, a cheerful woman named Vasquez, was humming an old Earth song while she plotted their approach vector to the mysterious vessel. You know, Doc, Rodriguez said as he secured his sidearm in its zero-gravity holster, in all my years of security work, the phrase, "let's go poke the unknown alien artifact" has never preceded anything that ended well. That's because you lack scientific curiosity, Kieran replied, calibrating his bioscanner for maximum sensitivity. Besides, what's the worst that could happen? Famous last words, Vasquez called from the pilot's seat. Though if it makes you feel better, I've got the engines warmed up for a very fast departure if things go sideways. The alien vessel grew larger in the shuttle's viewports as they approached, and Kieran felt his breath catch as the details became visible. The hull appeared to be constructed from some kind of crystalline material that seemed to shift and flow like liquid while maintaining its solid structure. Elegant curves and impossible angles created a design that was both beautiful and utterly foreign, as if the very concepts of physics that governed human engineering held no meaning for its creators. My God, Kieran whispered, pressing his face to the viewport. It's gorgeous. It's weird, Rodriguez corrected. Gorgeous things don't usually drift dead through space. Maybe it's not as dead as we think, Kieran said, noting how his instruments were beginning to register faint energy signatures from within the vessel. I'm reading quantum fluctuations consistent with some kind of suspended animation system. Suspended animation? Vasquez glanced back from her controls. You mean there might be someone alive in there? Or something, Rodriguez added grimly. Let's not forget we're dealing with completely unknown biology here. The shuttle's docking clamps engaged with the alien vessel's hull with a soft metallic click that resonated through both ship structures. Kieran watched his instruments carefully as the airlock systems attempted to interface with whatever passed for an entry port on the crystalline craft. Atmospheric composition is, well, it's breathable, he announced after several minutes of analysis. Oxygen-nitrogen mix, though there are trace elements I don't recognize. Temperature is maintained at roughly 18 degrees Celsius, which suggests environmental systems are still functioning at some level. Or it's a trap designed to make us think the environment is safe, Rodriguez muttered, but he was already checking his breathing apparatus and preparing for entry. The airlock cycled with a sound like crystal chimes, and Kieran found himself stepping into a corridor that seemed to have been grown rather than built. The walls curved organically around them, their surfaces covered in patterns that might have been decorative or functional, or both. Soft bioluminescent strips provided gentle illumination that shifted through subtle spectrum changes as they moved deeper into the vessel. This is incredible, Kieran breathed, recording everything with his suit's visual systems while his scanners worked overtime to catalog the strange materials surrounding them. The construction techniques alone could revolutionize our understanding of materials science. Less admiring, more investigating, Rodriguez reminded him, though even the security chief seemed impressed by the elegant beauty of their surroundings. We're here to determine if this thing poses a threat, remember? They found the ship's central chamber behind a door that opened at their approach, sliding aside with the same crystalline chime they'd heard at the airlock. The room beyond took Kieran's breath away, a perfect sphere lined with what appeared to be living crystal that pulsed with soft, rhythmic light. And in the center, suspended in a column of shimmering energy, was a figure that made his heart stop. She appeared human at first glance, though the pointed ears and luminescent skin suggested otherwise. Her dark hair floated around her face as if she were underwater, and her clothing seemed to be woven from the same flowing material as the ship's hull. Most importantly, she was beautiful in a way that seemed to transcend species barriers, with features that combined the familiar with the wondrously alien. Is she? Rodriguez began. Alive, Kieran finished, his scanner readings confirming what his instincts already told him. Barely, but alive. This is some kind of cryogenic suspension system, far more advanced than anything we've developed. Can we revive her? Kieran studied his readings, noting the complex bioharmonic patterns that seemed to regulate her suspended state. Maybe. But it would be incredibly risky. We don't know anything about her physiology, her medical needs, or what kind of revival process her species requires. We also don't know how long this suspension system will continue to function, Rodriguez pointed out. If it fails while we're debating, she dies anyway. That decided it for Kieran. He'd become a xenobiologist to study life in all its forms, not to watch helplessly while a sentient being died for lack of action. He began unpacking his medical equipment, modifying the revival protocols to account for the alien physiology his scanners were revealing. You realize this could kill her, Rodriguez said quietly. Not trying could definitely kill her, Kieran replied, initializing the revival sequence. Sometimes you have to take risks to save a life. As the suspension field began to fluctuate under his careful manipulations, Kieran had no idea he was about to rescue the woman who would become his wife. All he knew was that somewhere in this crystalline chamber, a life hung in the balance, and he was perhaps the only person in the galaxy with the knowledge and equipment to save her. The medical bay of Omega-7 had never hosted a patient quite like Lyralii Starweaver, though Kieran reflected that the sterile human environment actually complemented her otherworldly appearance rather beautifully. She'd been conscious for 3 days now, recovering from what she'd explained was nearly a century of suspended animation, and each conversation revealed new layers of complexity in both her biology and her situation. Your revival technique was most ingenious, she said, her voice carrying those musical overtones that seemed to resonate directly in Kieran's chest. Though I confess, awakening to find myself in the care of an unknown species was disconcerting. I can imagine, Kieran replied, adjusting the biomonitors that tracked her vital signs. The reading still baffled him. Her cardiac rhythm followed patterns that would indicate severe arrhythmia in a human, but seemed perfectly normal for her physiology. Though I have to ask, what exactly were you running from when your ship's systems failed? Lyralii's expression grew troubled, and Kieran noticed how her luminescent skin dimmed slightly when she was distressed. It was one of many fascinating biological adaptations he'd observed over the past few days, along with her ability to perceive electromagnetic fields and her apparent sensitivity to emotional states. An arranged union, she said carefully. Among my people, those born with the gift of star singing are considered valuable assets for political alliances. My family arranged for me to bond with Prince Zephyr Voidcaller of the Outer Spiral Territories. And you weren't interested in this Prince Zephyr? I have never met him, Lyralii said with a laugh that sounded like crystal bells in a gentle breeze. Etherian unions are typically arranged based on genetic compatibility and political advantage rather than personal preference. The concept of choosing one's own life partner is foreign to our culture. Kieran paused in his examination, struck by the implications of her words. So you ran away from an arranged marriage to someone you'd never met? It seemed preferable to spending eternity bound to a stranger, she said, then tilted her head in that curious gesture he was beginning to recognize. Your people choose their own mates. Usually, yes. We call it dating, courting, romance, the whole process of getting to know someone before deciding to spend your life with them. Kieran found himself smiling at her obvious fascination with the concept. Though our success rate isn't exactly stellar. About half of human marriages end in divorce. Divorce? Ending the partnership when it doesn't work out. Lyralii's eyes widened with surprise. Your people can dissolve life bonds. How remarkable. Among the Etherians, once two individuals undergo the ritual of eternal pairing, their life forces become permanently intertwined. Separation would mean death for both partners. That's quite a commitment, Kieran said, trying to keep his voice light despite the sudden flutter in his chest. No pressure or anything. Indeed. Which is why I found the prospect of bonding with a stranger so troubling. She studied him with those impossibly deep eyes, and Kieran felt the strange sensation that she was reading something in him that he didn't fully understand himself. Though I confess, the time I have spent in your company has given me new perspective on the concept of partnership. How so? You saved my life at considerable risk to yourself, with no expectation of reward or recognition. You have shown me kindness, patience, and genuine interest in my well-being. You make me laugh with your peculiar human humor, and you ask thoughtful questions about my people and our customs. Lyralii paused, her skin brightening slightly. If all human males possess such qualities, it is no wonder your species allows individuals to choose their own mates. Kieran felt heat rising in his cheeks and busied himself with calibrating a scanner to hide his embarrassment. I think you're giving me too much credit. I'm just doing my job. Your job requires you to spend your personal time teaching me to play chess. Well, no, or to bring me books from your personal library so I might learn about human culture and history. That's just being friendly, or to sit beside my bed for hours yesterday when I experienced those memory fluctuations, talking to me about your childhood on Earth until the disorientation passed. Kieran stopped what he was doing and looked at her directly. She was smiling at him with an expression that seemed to hold depths of meaning he was only beginning to grasp. Lyralii, he said carefully, are you saying what I think you're saying? I am saying that in 3 days, you have shown me more consideration and genuine affection than I expected to receive in a lifetime with Prince Zephyr. Her voice grew softer, more serious. I am also saying that my empathic abilities allow me to perceive the emotional resonance between individuals, and what I sense when we are together is unprecedented. Unprecedented how? The harmonic patterns are unlike anything described in our ancient texts, save for one reference to something called the eternal pairing of souls. It was considered mythology, a romantic legend with no basis in biological reality. She reached out and placed her hand over his, and Kieran felt a strange warmth that seemed to extend far beyond the physical touch. Until now. Are you suggesting that we're, destined for each other? Kieran asked, his scientific mind struggling with concepts that seemed to exist outside the realm of empirical measurement. I am suggesting that the universe has a sense of humor far more sophisticated than either of our species realized, Lyralii replied with a gentle laugh. You rescued me from certain death, and in doing so, you may have rescued yourself from a life without the one person whose soul resonates perfectly with your own. Kieran stared at her, trying to process the implications of what she was telling him. This resonance thing, it's not just some kind of alien equivalent of infatuation. Infatuation is temporary, based on superficial attraction and idealized perception. Soul resonance is permanent. Fundamental. It exists at the quantum level of existence itself. Lyralii's expression grew more serious. Among my people, such resonance occurs perhaps once in 1,000 generations. To find it with a member of another species should be impossible. Should be, but apparently isn't. Apparently not. She squeezed his hand gently. Though I confess, the implications are somewhat overwhelming. Kieran felt a laugh building in his chest, born of wonder and disbelief and a dozen other emotions he couldn't quite name. Overwhelming. Lyralii, I'm a xenobiologist who spends most of his time studying bacteria. 3 days ago, my biggest concern was whether the commissary would run out of real coffee. Now you're telling me I've accidentally discovered my soulmate while conducting a routine rescue operation. When you phrase it in such terms, it does sound rather implausible, she admitted. Implausible doesn't begin to cover it. This is the kind of thing that happens in romance novels, not in real life. Kieran shook his head in amazement. Though I suppose if it was going to happen anywhere, a remote mining station at the edge of known space would be appropriately dramatic. You find the situation amusing? I find it miraculous, he said, surprised by his own honesty. Terrifying and wonderful and completely impossible, but miraculous. Lyralii's smile lit up her entire face, and her skin brightened to a warm golden glow that filled the medical bay with soft light. Then you are not disturbed by the implications? Disturbed. Lyralii, I've spent the last 3 days falling for someone I thought was completely out of my league on the grounds of being a different species. Finding out that the universe apparently has a plan for us is the least disturbing news I could imagine. Even though it means defying the political arrangements of my people. Even though it could lead to complications we cannot yet foresee. Kieran considered this, thinking about the arranged marriage she'd fled from and the Prince Zephyr who was presumably still looking for her. The rational part of his mind catalogued all the ways this situation could go catastrophically wrong, but the larger part, the part that had spent 3 days discovering that love at first sight wasn't just a poetic concept, pushed those concerns aside. Lyralii, he said, I brought you back from suspended animation using improvised medical equipment and pure stubbornness. If we can overcome that kind of technical challenge, I'm reasonably confident we can handle whatever complications the universe throws at us. Even an angry Etherean prince with a battle fleet? Even an angry Etherean prince with a battle fleet, Kieran confirmed, though he made a mental note to research exactly what constituted Etherean military technology. Though I reserve the right to panic appropriately when that becomes an immediate concern. Lyralii laughed, and the sound filled the medical bay with harmonic overtones that seemed to resonate in his bones. I believe this partnership may prove quite interesting, Dr. Kieran Thorne. I'm counting on it, he replied, and found himself looking forward to discovering just how interesting their impossible love story could become. The first indication that their peaceful interlude was about to end came from Lieutenant Chen's increasingly frantic reports about massive energy signatures approaching the outer system. Kieran was in the middle of explaining human recreational activities to Lyralii, specifically why humans found competitive sports entertaining, when the proximity alarms began their familiar wailing throughout Omega-7. Dar. Thorne to the command center immediately, came Commander Morrison's voice over the intercom, carrying an edge of tension that made Kieran's stomach clench. We have a situation. Lyralii's expression shifted from curious amusement to something approaching dread as the implications of the alarm became clear. He found me, she said quietly, her luminescent skin dimming to its most subdued level. Prince Zephyr. Who else would command a fleet large enough to trigger your station's defense protocols? She stood gracefully from the medical bed where she'd been sitting, and Kieran noticed how her posture had changed from relaxed to almost military bearing. I should have anticipated this. He is nothing if not persistent. How persistent are we talking about? Kieran asked as they made their way through the station's corridors toward the command center. Because I'm getting the feeling this is going to be more complicated than a simple diplomatic discussion. Prince Zephyr has spent the better part of a century searching for me, Lyralii said, her voice tight with resignation. He views our arranged union as a matter of honor, political necessity, and personal pride. Discovering that I have formed an emotional attachment to another individual, particularly one from a different species, will not improve his disposition. Wonderful. And I suppose explaining that you're happy with your current situation won't be sufficient to change his mind? Etherean political marriages are considered binding contracts between family lines. Breaking such an arrangement requires either the death of one party or formal challenge under ancient law. Lyralii glanced at him with an expression that might have been apologetic. Neither option seems particularly appealing at the moment. They entered the command center to find organized chaos. Every display screen showed tactical information about the approaching vessels, 17 ships of clearly alien design, each roughly the size of a human capital ship but with the same flowing, crystalline aesthetic as Lyralii's smaller craft. The lead vessel was significantly larger than the others, its hull decorated with patterns that seemed to shift and flow like liquid starlight. Dr. Thorne, Commander Morrison called from the central console, your guest might want to see this. The main view screen flickered to life, showing the interior of what was obviously a command bridge. The figure standing at its center was unmistakably Etherean, with the same pointed ears and luminescent skin as Lyralii, but where she radiated warmth and gentle light, this individual seemed to embody cold starfire. Prince Zephyr Voidcaller was tall, imposing, and clearly accustomed to being obeyed without question. Attention, human mining facility, The prince's voice carried the same musical quality as Lyraliai's, but with harmonics that suggested barely controlled anger. You are harboring Lyraliai Starweaver, heir to the cosmic symphony and my intended mate. Surrender her immediately, and your facility will be spared. Well, Kieran said to no one in particular, he certainly gets straight to the point. Commander Morrison activated the communication system. This is Commander Morrison of Omega 7. We are a civilian mining operation operating under the jurisdiction of the Terran Colonial Authority. We don't have any record of silence. The prince's interruption caused visible interference patterns across the communication array. My instruments detect Lyraliai's life signature aboard your facility. Attempt no deception, humans. Return what belongs to me, or face the consequences. Lyraliai stepped forward, her expression resolute despite the obvious stress of the situation. Commander, may I? Morrison nodded and gestured toward the communication pickup. Lyraliai took a deep breath, her skin brightening with determination. Hello, Zephyr, she said calmly. You're looking well for someone who spent a century chasing shadows across the galaxy. The prince's expression shifted from cold anger to something approaching relief, followed immediately by renewed fury. Lyraliai. You will explain your extended absence and prepare for immediate transport to my vessel. I'm afraid that won't be possible, she replied with remarkable composure. I have found sanctuary among these people, and I have no intention of leaving. Sanctuary? Prince Zephyr's voice rose in pitch, creating harmonic frequencies that made several of the station's electronic systems whine in protest. You speak of sanctuary while dishonoring our family compact and making a mockery of centuries of tradition. I speak of choosing my own destiny rather than accepting one imposed upon me by others, Lyraliai shot back, her own voice gaining harmonic power. And before you begin threatening these innocent people, perhaps you should consider whether forcing an unwilling partner into eternal pairing is truly the honorable course of action. Kieran watched this exchange with fascination and growing concern. The emotional undercurrents between the two Etherians were creating visible energy discharges across the communication array, and several of the station's power systems were beginning to fluctuate in response to their harmonic conflict. Your willingness is irrelevant, the prince declared. Our union serves the greater good of both our houses and the stability of the outer spiral territories. Personal preference cannot supersede political necessity. And what of personal happiness? Lyraliai asked. What of the possibility that both of us might find greater fulfillment with partners of our own choosing? For a moment, Prince Zephyr's expression wavered, and Kieran caught a glimpse of something that might have been uncertainty beneath the royal arrogance. Then the moment passed, and the cold authority returned. Happiness is a luxury neither of us can afford, he said firmly. You will return to my vessel within the hour, or I will take you by force. That would be inadvisable, Commander Morrison interjected, his military training taking over. This facility is under the protection of the Terran Colonial Authority. Any aggressive action against civilian personnel or infrastructure would constitute an act of war. Prince Zephyr's laugh was like the sound of breaking crystal. Your species possesses impressive determination, Commander, but your military capabilities are insufficient to pose any meaningful threat to my fleet. Maybe not, Kieran said, stepping into the communication range, but we do have something you want. That gives us negotiating position. The prince's attention focused on him with laser intensity, and Kieran felt the full weight of Etherian empathic abilities pressing against his mind. It was like being examined by a searchlight that could peer directly into his soul. You, Prince Zephyr said slowly, are the human who has corrupted Lyraliai's judgment. I prefer to think of myself as the human who helped her realize she had choices, Kieran replied, surprised by his own calm in the face of the prince's obvious hostility. Though I suppose perspective is everything. You dare to interfere in affairs that predate your species' emergence from primitive barbarism? I dare to suggest that maybe, just maybe, forcing two people into a lifelong commitment they don't want isn't the wisest foundation for political stability. Kieran could feel Lyraliai's surprise at his willingness to confront her intimidating suitor, but he pressed on. Besides, wouldn't you prefer a partner who actually wanted to be with you? For the second time, uncertainty flickered across the prince's features. My personal preferences are subordinate to duty. Are they? Or is that just what you've been told so often that you've stopped questioning it? The silence that followed was broken only by the hum of the station's life support systems and the distant vibration of the prince's fleet maintaining position. Finally, Prince Zephyr spoke again, his voice carefully controlled. You presume to understand matters beyond your comprehension, human. Maybe I do, Kieran admitted. But I understand enough to know that Lyraliai deserves the chance to choose her own future. And honestly, so do you. The matter is not subject to debate, the prince said, but Kieran detected a note of doubt in his voice. However, Etherian law does provide for one alternative to the current arrangement. Lyraliai's eyes widened with sudden hope. The trial of Heartsong? An ancient provision, rarely invoked, Prince Zephyr confirmed reluctantly. If another individual can demonstrate true resonance with your life force, they may challenge the existing arrangement through the harmony of souls. And if they succeed? Then you would be free to choose your own path. The prince's expression grew grim. However, the trial requires perfect synchronization of life energies. Failure results in permanent neural damage for the challenger and psychic trauma for the intended recipient. Kieran felt his stomach drop. Define permanent neural damage. Death, Lyraliai said quietly. The trial is designed for Etherian physiology. No other species has ever attempted it and survived. Well, Kieran said, trying to keep his voice light despite the sudden realization that he was contemplating what amounted to a potentially fatal test of true love, that explains why it's rarely invoked. Kieran, you cannot seriously be considering this, Lyraliai said urgently. The risk is far too great. The risk of losing you is greater, he replied, meeting her gaze steadily. Besides, didn't you say our resonance was unprecedented? Maybe that's enough to overcome the physiological limitations. Prince Zephyr studied them both for a long moment, his expression unreadable. You would risk death for the sake of this attachment. I would risk death for the sake of love, Kieran corrected. There's a difference. Indeed, the prince said slowly. Very well. If you are determined to attempt this fool's errand, I will allow the trial to proceed. But understand, when you fail, Lyraliai returns with me, and your species will have learned the cost of interfering in Etherian affairs. And when I succeed? Kieran asked with more confidence than he felt. Then you will have accomplished something that should be impossible, Prince Zephyr replied. Which would be noteworthy. As the communication ended and the command center erupted into urgent discussions about the implications of their situation, Kieran found himself wondering whether love really could conquer death, alien biology, and centuries of political tradition. He was about to find out. The ceremonial chamber aboard Prince Zephyr's flagship defied every principle of architecture that Kieran understood. The space seemed to exist in more dimensions than the standard three, with walls that curved impossibly inward while somehow containing a room large enough to accommodate representatives from both species. Crystalline formations grew from floor to ceiling like frozen music, their surfaces reflecting light that hadn't been there moments before. This is absolutely terrifying, Kieran muttered to Lyraliai as technicians from both the Etherian fleet and Omega-7 worked to calibrate the neural interface that would either prove their love or kill him. Just wanted to get that on the record. You could still withdraw, she said, though her voice carried little hope that he would. Prince Zephyr would consider it wise rather than cowardly. Prince Zephyr would consider it proof that humans aren't worthy of Etherian consideration, Kieran replied, watching as the alien technicians assembled what looked like a combination of medical equipment and musical instrument. Besides, I didn't rescue you from suspended animation just to hand you over to someone who thinks duty is more important than happiness. The device they were constructing appeared to be grown rather than built, its organic curves and flowing lines matching the aesthetic of Etherian technology. Neural interfaces branched from a central crystalline core like the dendrites of some exotic brain, while harmonic resonators created standing wave patterns in the air around the ceremony space. The harmony of souls requires perfect synchronization between the participants' bioelectric fields, explained Master Harmonist Celestria, the elderly Etherean who would oversee the trial. Her voice carried the wisdom of centuries, and her luminescent skin bore patterns that seemed to shift like living constellation maps. For members of our species, this is achieved through empathic resonance and harmonic alignment. For an alien physiology, it's probably impossible, Kieran finished. I get it. But we won't know until we try. Prince Zephyr approached from across the chamber, his expression unreadable as he studied the preparations. I confess myself curious about your motivations, human. You risk everything for an individual you have known for mere days. Sometimes days are enough, Kieran replied. Sometimes you meet someone and realize that everything before that moment was just preparation for finding them. Romantic sentimentality, the prince said dismissively, though Kieran detected something in his voice that might have been envy. Have you ever been in love, Your Highness? Kieran asked. Actually in love, not just politically paired with someone. The question seemed to catch Prince Zephyr off guard. For a moment, his carefully controlled expression wavered, revealing depths of loneliness that Kieran hadn't expected. Love is a luxury I cannot afford, the prince said finally. My duty is to my people, my bloodline, and the stability of our territories. That's not an answer to my question. Prince Zephyr was quiet for a long moment, his gaze distant. There was someone. Long ago. Before the arrangements were finalized with Lyraliai's family. What happened? I chose duty over desire. As I was trained to do. As all royalty must do. The prince's voice grew harder. She found happiness with another, as was her right. I found purpose in governance, as was mine. And you've been miserable ever since, Kieran said gently. Happiness is irrelevant to effective leadership. Is it? Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you've spent a century chasing after someone who doesn't want to marry you, which doesn't seem particularly effective. Lyraliai had been listening to this exchange with growing understanding, and now she stepped closer to the prince. Zephyr, you don't have to do this either. The political compact could be dissolved by mutual agreement. And leave both our houses without the alliance that secures their futures. Or create a new kind of alliance, Kieran suggested. One based on cooperation rather than forced marriage. Your people have technology we could benefit from, and we have resources and knowledge that could help you. Why not build a partnership that doesn't require anyone to sacrifice their personal happiness? Prince Zephyr stared at him as if he'd suggested rewriting the fundamental laws of physics. You propose to restructure centuries of diplomatic tradition based on romantic idealism. I propose to restructure centuries of diplomatic tradition based on the radical idea that happy people make better allies than miserable ones, Kieran replied. Though I admit the romantic idealism is definitely a factor. Master Harmonist Celestria cleared her throat with a sound like wind chimes in a gentle breeze. The preparations are complete. If the trial is to proceed, we must begin now. The harmonic alignments are optimal for the next 12 minutes. Kieran felt his heart rate spike as the reality of what he was about to attempt settled over him. The neural interface looked even more intimidating up close, its organic components seeming to pulse with their own life force. He'd spent his career studying alien biology, but he was about to trust his life to technology he didn't understand, in service of a ritual based on concepts that shouldn't exist. Any last-minute advice? He asked Lyraliai as the technicians began attaching the neural connectors to various points on his skull. Remember that love is not a feeling but a choice, she said, taking his hand as her own neural interface was activated. Choose to love me, and I will choose to love you, and perhaps that will be enough to bridge the gap between our species. And if it isn't? Then we will have tried something impossible for the sake of something precious, she replied. Either way, we will have lived authentically. The neural interface activated with a sensation like electricity made of music. Kieran felt his consciousness expand beyond the boundaries of his physical form, reaching out across the space between them to touch something that was unmistakably Lyralii. Her thoughts, her emotions, her very essence seemed to welcome him with a warmth that transcended biological differences. But the trial demanded more than emotional connection. As the harmonic resonators began their complex patterns, Kieran felt the system trying to synchronize his bioelectric field with Lyralii's. The process was unlike anything he'd ever experienced, part medical procedure, part musical performance, part spiritual communion. His human nervous system, evolved on Earth under different stars with different physics, struggled to match the elegant patterns of Etherian biology. Pain lanced through his skull as the interface pushed his brain beyond its normal operational parameters. He could hear Lyralii calling his name, feel her trying to adjust her own patterns to accommodate his limitations, but the gap between their physiologies seemed insurmountable. Then, just as his vision began to blur and he felt his consciousness slipping away, something unexpected happened. The love he felt for Lyralii, the deep, fundamental connection that had grown between them over their brief time together, began to resonate not just emotionally but physically. His bioelectric field found a harmonic frequency that matched hers not through biological similarity, but through sheer force of emotional truth. The chamber filled with light as their synchronized life forces created visible auroras that danced between the crystalline formations. The assembled witnesses from both species watched in amazement as patterns of energy that shouldn't have been possible painted the air in colors that had no names. "Impossible," Master Harmonist Celestria whispered, her ancient voice filled with wonder. "Unprecedented," Prince Zephyr added, though his tone carried admiration rather than skepticism. "Exhausting," Kieran managed as the trial concluded and the neural interfaces powered down. "Did we?" "You succeeded," Lyralii said, tears of joy streaming down her luminescent face. The harmonic resonance was perfect. More than perfect, it was transcendent. Prince Zephyr approached them as the ceremonial equipment was deactivated, his expression thoughtful. "I have witnessed something today that challenges everything I thought I understood about the nature of emotional bonds between sentient beings." "Does that mean?" Kieran began. "It means you have earned the right to choose your own destiny," the prince said formally. "Both of you. The political compact between our houses is hereby dissolved by the authority vested in me as heir to the Voidcaller lineage." "And what about your own destiny?" Lyralii asked gently. "Will you finally allow yourself to seek happiness rather than duty?" Prince Zephyr was quiet for a long moment, his gaze distant. "Perhaps it is time to explore new possibilities. Your human friend has raised questions about the effectiveness of traditional approaches that deserve consideration." "Your Highness," Commander Morrison interjected from where he'd been observing the ceremony, "if you're interested in new possibilities, the Terran Colonial Authority would be very interested in establishing formal diplomatic relations with the Etherian people. Trade agreements, cultural exchange, joint scientific endeavors, the potential benefits could be substantial for both our species." "An intriguing proposal," the prince mused. "Though I confess, after witnessing today's events, I find myself more interested in the personal applications of interspecies cooperation." "Meaning?" Kieran asked. "Meaning I believe I shall visit your Earth and see what this dating process entails," Prince Zephyr said with the first genuine smile Kieran had seen from him. "If love can bridge the gap between species, perhaps it can also bridge the gap between duty and desire." 2 months later, Kieran stood on the observation deck of Omega-7, watching as another Etherian vessel approached the station. This one was smaller than Prince Zephyr's flagship, its hull bearing the flowing script that Lyralii had taught him to recognize as wedding decorations. The ceremony would be a fusion of human and Etherian traditions, officiated by both Commander Morrison and Master Harmonist Celestria, with representatives from both species in attendance. "Nervous?" Lyralii asked, joining him at the viewport. Her wedding attire was a masterpiece of Etherian craftsmanship, woven from fibers that seemed to capture and hold starlight. Terrified, Kieran admitted. Getting married is scary enough without having to worry about whether your bioelectric fields are properly synchronized. Our fields have been synchronized since the moment you chose to save my life, she said, taking his hand and filling their shared space with the warm glow of contentment. Everything else is just paperwork. Very complicated, potentially deadly paperwork, Kieran pointed out. The best kind, she agreed with a laugh that still made his heart skip beats. As they made their way to the ceremonial chamber that had been prepared for their wedding, Kieran reflected on the strange chain of events that had brought them together. A routine rescue mission had become a love story that spanned species and challenged centuries of tradition. In saving Lyreliai's life, he had somehow found his own purpose, not just as a scientist studying alien biology, but as a bridge between worlds, a proof that love really could conquer the vast distances between the stars. The universe, it seemed, had an excellent sense of timing. And an even better sense of humor.